My coffee mug crashed to the marble floor as the clerk's words sank in. Miss Walker, I apologize, but I cannot find your reservation. Behind me, my sister's heels clicked closer. I only made reservations for our real family, she announced loudly as my parents turned their backs, pretending not to see my humiliation. The ceramic shards scattered across the pristine lobby like fragments of my shattered heart. But as I stood there surrounded by the wreckage of what I thought was love, something inside me shifted. This deliberate cruelty would become their biggest mistake. 6 hours earlier, I had been standing in Terminal C at Denver International Airport, genuinely excited for what I believed would be a healing family trip. My name is Carly Walker, and at 28 years old, I had finally convinced myself that my relationship with my family was worth salvaging. This weekend was supposed to celebrate my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, and my sister Jessica had surprised everyone by suggesting we all take a trip together to the Belmont Resort in Aspen. Jessica and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was 2 years younger, but had somehow always been the shining star of our family. While I struggled through college on scholarships and student loans, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, Jessica glided through life with our parents' unwavering support and financial backing. She graduated debt-free from a prestigious private university and immediately landed a position at a high-end real estate development firm where our father, Robert, had connections. Despite our differences, I had been genuinely thrilled when Jessica called 3 weeks ago to invite me on this trip. Carly, she had said, her voice unusually warm, I know we haven't always been close, but Mom and Dad's anniversary is really important. I want us all to be together as a family. Her words had touched something deep in my heart that I thought had died years ago. Maybe we could finally bridge the gap that had grown between us. I had cleared my entire work schedule for this weekend. As a freelance marketing consultant specializing in small businesses, taking 4 days off meant losing significant income, but I told myself that family was worth the sacrifice. I had spent my savings on a beautiful crystal vase for my parents and a silk scarf for Jessica, carefully chosen gifts that I hoped would show how much this reconciliation meant to me. The flight arrangements had seemed almost too good to be true. Jessica had booked first-class tickets for everyone, something I never could have afforded on my own. When I tried to insist on paying my share, she had waved me off with an uncharacteristic generosity. Don't worry about it, Carly. Dad's company is doing really well, and we want you there. Consider it our treat. I had been moved to tears by what I interpreted as genuine love and inclusion. During the 2-hour flight, I found myself chatting more openly with my parents than I had in years. My mother, Linda, actually asked about my work and seemed interested in my answers. She had always been polite, but distant, treating me with the kind of careful courtesy you might show to an acquaintance rather than a daughter. But today, she seemed different, more engaged, even asking about my dating life and whether I was happy living alone in my small apartment in Boulder. My father, Robert, had been equally attentive, asking about my marketing strategies and nodding approvingly as I described my recent success with a local restaurant chain. He had never shown much interest in my career before, always seeming to focus exclusively on Jessica's achievements in real estate development. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged in my own family. Jessica had been particularly sweet during the flight, sharing childhood memories and laughing about inside jokes I thought she had forgotten. She even apologized for being distant during our teenage years, attributing it to typical sibling rivalry that she claimed to have outgrown. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, she said, her perfectly manicured hand touching my arm. Life is too short to hold grudges, you know. When we landed in Aspen and took the shuttle to the Belmont Resort, I was overwhelmed by the luxury of the place. The resort was a stunning mountain retreat that must have cost a fortune for a weekend stay. The lobby alone was more elegant than any place I had ever stayed, with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic views of the snow-capped peaks. I felt grateful beyond words that my family had included me in something so special. As we approached the check-in desk, I had been admiring the beautiful flower arrangements and commenting on the incredible mountain views visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The hotel staff was impeccably professional, and everything seemed perfect for what I hoped would be a weekend of healing and reconnection. But then the desk clerk, a young woman with kind eyes and a professional smile, had delivered those devastating words that would change everything. "Miss Walker, I apologize, but I cannot find your reservation." That's when Jessica's heel clicks had approached from behind, and with a voice loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, she had announced, "I only made reservations for our real family." As my coffee mug hit the marble floor and shattered into countless pieces, I felt something inside me break as well, but as I watched my parents turn away, as I saw the smirks on the faces of other guests who had witnessed my humiliation, as I realized that every kind word and gesture over the past 3 weeks had been calculated, manipulation, a different kind of strength, began to emerge from the wreckage of my trust. Jessica pulled out her phone with theatrical flair, scrolling through what appeared to be a group chat conversation. She held the screen toward me with a satisfied smile that I had never seen before, one that was both cruel and victorious. "Actually, Carly, there's something you should see. We've been discussing this trip for weeks." My hands trembling, I took the phone and began reading messages that dated back almost a month. The group chat was called Anniversary Planning and included Jessica, both of my parents, and several extended family members whose names I recognized. What I read made my blood run cold. "Jessica, so we're all agreed. This is the perfect opportunity to finally cut the dead weight." "Dad, your mother and I have been talking about this for years. Carly always brings the mood down at family events." "Mom, she's so needy and dramatic. This trip will be perfect without her constant need for attention." "Jessica, I already researched it. We can't legally abandon her at the airport, but we can make it clear she's not welcome. Maybe she'll finally get the hint and stop trying to force herself into family events." The messages continued for pages, each one more devastating than the last. They had discussed my work schedule, knowing I would have to sacrifice income to attend. They had debated the best way to maximize my humiliation while protecting themselves from any legal consequences. They had even laughed about my grateful reaction to the first-class ticket, calling me pathetically eager to please and desperate for crumbs of approval. Reading those messages felt like being stabbed repeatedly in the chest. Every kind word, every warm gesture, every moment of hope I had felt over the past 3 weeks had been a carefully orchestrated lie designed to set up this moment of maximum cruelty. As I stood there reading the devastating messages, other hotel guests began to notice our family drama unfolding in the elegant lobby. A middle-aged businessman with an expensive watch glanced up from his newspaper, his eyebrows raising with interest. A couple in designer skiing attire paused their conversation to stare openly at our scene. Even the hotel staff behind the marble reception desk began exchanging concerned glances as Jessica's voice grew louder and more theatrical. The group chat messages revealed layers of betrayal that went far deeper than a single cruel prank. I scrolled through weeks of planning where my family had discussed not just this trip, but their long-term strategy for pushing me out of their lives entirely. They had researched legal boundaries, consulted with friends about difficult family members, and even debated whether to tell me about the trip at all or just let me show up to discover I wasn't included. One message from my mother particularly crushed me. "I know she's technically our daughter, but she's never felt like real family anyway. Maybe it's time to stop pretending and let her find her own way in life." My father had responded, "Linda's right. We've carried this burden long enough. Jessica deserves to have family events that aren't overshadowed by Carly's problems." Jessica had been the mastermind coordinating every detail of my humiliation with the precision of a military operation. She had researched the exact cost of the first-class ticket she had pretended to gift me, calculating how much of my limited savings I would spend on gifts and lost work income. She had timed her invitation to coincide with my busiest work period, knowing I would have to turn down paying clients to attend. But the most heartbreaking revelation was a message thread about my childhood. They discussed how I had never really fit in after my adoption, how I had always been too sensitive and too grateful, and how they had grown tired of what they called my desperate need for approval. They laughed about inside jokes I thought we shared, revealing they were actually mocking references to my social awkwardness and my attempts to bond with them over the years. As I read these messages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, I became aware that our drama was attracting more attention. A family with teenage children had stopped near the lobby seating area, the parents whispering while the teenagers openly gawked. The elegant atmosphere of the resort lobby was transforming into something that felt more like a public spectacle. Jessica seemed to relish the growing audience. She raised her voice, deliberately addressing not just me, but everyone within hearing distance. You know what, Carly, since everyone can hear this anyway, maybe it's time for some honesty. You were adopted when you were 3 years old, and honestly, it never really worked out. We tried to include you, we really did, but you just don't fit with our family dynamic. The words hit me like physical blows, not because I hadn't known I was adopted, I had always known that, but because of the casual cruelty with which she announced it to strangers, and the implication that my adoption was somehow a failed experiment they were now abandoning. My mother Linda stepped forward with perfectly styled gray hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Instead of defending me or showing any discomfort with Jessica's public attack, she nodded approvingly. We should have had this conversation years ago. You've always struggled to understand family boundaries, Carly. Perhaps this experience will help you realize that not every relationship is meant to be forced. My father, Robert, stood beside her with his arms crossed, wearing the same expression of mild annoyance he might show toward a persistent salesperson. We've tried to be patient, but your constant need for inclusion in every family event has become exhausting. It's time you learn to build your own life instead of trying to insert yourself into ours. The lobby had grown increasingly quiet as other guests strained to hear our conversation. I could see hotel staff members huddled near the reception desk, clearly unsure whether they should intervene in what was becoming an extremely public family crisis. The beautiful mountain views and elegant decor that had impressed me minutes earlier now felt like the backdrop for my complete humiliation. What made the situation even more surreal was how calm and collected my family appeared. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a moment of anger. This was a calculated execution of a plan they had been developing for weeks. They had brought me here specifically for this purpose, spending money and coordinating schedules, not to celebrate together, but to destroy me as publicly and thoroughly as possible. As I tried to process the scope of their betrayal, a young man in his early 30s approached our group. He was casually dressed in jeans and a sweater, carrying a smartphone that he held at an angle that made me realize he had been recording our entire conversation. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Jessica with a friendly smile. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I have to say this is absolutely the most brutal family drama I've ever witnessed. Do you mind if I ask a few questions? I think my followers would find this incredibly compelling content." Jessica's eyes lit up with excitement rather than embarrassment. "Oh, are you an influencer? I'd love to talk about this. Family toxicity is such an important topic, and I think people need to understand that sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for your own mental health." My heart sank as I realized this stranger had been recording what I thought was a private family crisis, and that Jessica was eager to continue the performance for his social media audience. The young man introduced himself as Brandon, explaining that he had over 200,000 followers on TikTok and specialized in real-life drama content. Within minutes, Brandon was conducting an impromptu interview with Jessica while I stood there in shock, surrounded by the broken pieces of my coffee mug and my shattered illusions about family love. Other guests had stopped pretending not to watch and were now openly filming with their own phones, turning my deepest pain into entertainment content. "So tell me," Brandon said, holding his phone steady as he recorded Jessica's perfectly composed face, "what made you finally decide to cut ties with your sister?" Jessica launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about toxic family dynamics and protecting your peace, using psychological buzzwords with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. She described me as emotionally manipulative and unable to respect boundaries, painting herself as a long-suffering victim who had finally found the courage to stand up for herself. The casual way she lied to thousands of strangers about our relationship was almost more devastating than the original betrayal. She spoke about incidents that had never happened, conversations that were complete fabrications, and a pattern of behavior that existed only in her imagination. But she delivered these lies with such conviction and apparent sincerity that I could see Brandon and his growing live audience accepting her narrative without question. As Jessica continued her performance, my phone began buzzing with notifications. The video was already being shared across multiple platforms, and my professional social media accounts were being tagged by strangers who had somehow connected my real name to the viral content. Standing there in the elegant lobby of the Belmont Resort, surrounded by the ruins of my family relationships and the growing crowd of strangers documenting my humiliation, I felt the last of my naive hopes about family love crumbling away. But beneath the devastation, something else was beginning to stir, a recognition that this level of cruelty couldn't go unanswered, and that sometimes the worst betrayals reveal truths that ultimately set you free. My phone buzzed insistently in my purse as notifications poured in faster than I could process them. The video Brandon had recorded was spreading across social media platforms with terrifying speed, already accumulating thousands of views, comments, and shares. Strangers were dissecting my family crisis as if it were entertainment, analyzing Jessica's performance and debating whether I deserved this public humiliation. Brandon continued his impromptu interview with Jessica, who had clearly found her element as the star of a viral drama. She posed naturally for his camera, her media training from her real estate career evident in how she angled herself for the most flattering shots while delivering increasingly damaging statements about my character. "The thing people need to understand about toxic family members," Jessica said, looking directly into Brandon's camera with practiced sincerity, "is that they often present themselves as victims while actually being the source of all the drama. Carly has spent years manipulating our parents' emotions, playing on their guilt about the adoption situation to get money and attention." I stood frozen as she fabricated elaborate stories about my supposedly manipulative behavior, describing incidents that bore no resemblance to our actual family history. She claimed I had borrowed money I never repaid, caused scenes at family gatherings that I had rarely even been invited to, and consistently played victim whenever I didn't get my way. Just last month, Jessica continued with convincing emotion. She called our mother crying because she couldn't make rent, and Mom felt so guilty that she sent her $800. But then we found out Carly had been telling the same sob story to our aunts and uncles, collecting money from everyone while claiming she was broke. This was a complete lie. I had never borrowed money from any family member and had always prided myself on my financial independence, however modest it might be. But Jessica delivered the fabrication with such specific details and apparent pain that even I might have believed her if I didn't know the truth. My parents stood nearby, nodding solemnly as Jessica painted her fictional portrait of my character. Their willingness to let her spread these lies about me to thousands of strangers felt like the deepest betrayal yet. These were people who had raised me, who knew my actual character and history, Yet they were allowing Jessica to destroy my reputation with deliberate falsehoods. Other hotel guests had formed an impromptu audience around us, some holding their own phones to record secondary angles of the drama. I heard whispered commentary as strangers analyzed my appearance and behavior, debating whether I looked like the manipulative person Jessica was describing. "She does look entitled," one woman murmured to her companion. "Look at how she's just standing there expecting sympathy." "I don't know," another voice replied. "She looks genuinely shocked to me. Maybe the family is the problem." The fact that strangers were casually debating my character based on a 30-second glimpse of my worst moment felt surreal and dehumanizing. I had become a character in someone else's story, a puzzle for internet strangers to solve, rather than a real person experiencing genuine devastation. Brandon's follower count was climbing rapidly as more people discovered the live stream. The comments section had exploded with viewers sharing their own family drama stories and debating whose side they supported. Some defended Jessica's right to cut off toxic family members, while others questioned the cruelty of the public confrontation method. My phone continued buzzing with notifications, and when I finally looked at the screen, my heart stopped. The video had already been cross-posted to multiple platforms, and people had somehow identified my professional social media accounts. My business Instagram, which I used to showcase my marketing work, was being flooded with comments from strangers who had seen the viral video. The comments ranged from supportive messages to harsh criticisms, but what worried me most were the mentions and tags from business contacts. Clients and potential clients were seeing this content and associating it with my professional reputation. In the small world of freelance marketing, reputation was everything, and I watched in real time as mine crumbled under the weight of viral family drama. But the situation was about to get infinitely worse. My phone rang with a call from Patricia, my biggest client and the owner of a successful chain of family restaurants. Patricia had hired me 6 months ago to handle their social media marketing and brand development, a contract that represented nearly 40% of my total income. "Carly." Patricia's voice was cold and professional, lacking any of the warmth that had characterized our previous conversations. "I'm calling about the video that's currently circulating on social media. Several of our customers have tagged our restaurant's account, asking if we're aware that our marketing consultant is involved in this family drama." My stomach dropped as I realized the full scope of how quickly my personal crisis was becoming a professional disaster. "Patricia, I can explain. This is a private family situation that's been taken completely out of context." "I'm sure it is," she replied with a tone that suggested she didn't believe me at all. "However, our restaurant brand is built around family values and wholesome dining experiences. We can't risk being associated with this kind of negative publicity. I'm afraid we're going to have to terminate our contract immediately." The line went dead, and I stared at my phone in disbelief. 6 months of hard work building a successful marketing campaign that had significantly increased their customer engagement and revenue destroyed in minutes because strangers on the internet had decided I was the villain in my own family's betrayal. Jessica had noticed my phone conversation and smiled with obvious satisfaction. She addressed Brandon's camera again, this time with crocodile tears in her eyes. "This is exactly what I mean about Carly. Even now, in the middle of a family crisis, she's worried about how this affects her business, rather than taking responsibility for her behavior. It's always about money and image with her." Her ability to twist my obvious distress about losing income into evidence of my supposed selfishness was masterful in its cruelty. She was systematically destroying every aspect of my life while positioning herself as a reasonable family member who had finally found the courage to confront a difficult situation. My father stepped closer to the camera, apparently deciding to add his voice to Jessica's narrative. "We've enabled this behavior for too long," he said with the authoritative tone he used in his real estate business. "Sometimes being a good parent means setting firm boundaries, even when it's difficult." The way he spoke about me as if I weren't standing right there, as if I were a problem to be managed rather than his daughter, completed my understanding of how thoroughly they had planned this destruction. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a family argument that had gotten out of hand. This was a coordinated attack designed to isolate me completely while protecting themselves from any criticism. As more notifications flooded my phone and I watched my professional life disintegrate in real time, I realized that Jessica, Robert, and Linda had miscalculated one crucial element of their plan. They had assumed I would slink away in shame, accepting their narrative and disappearing from their lives quietly. But standing there in the marble lobby of the Belmont Resort, surrounded by strangers filming my humiliation and watching my career crumble because of their lies, I felt something I had never experienced before. Not just anger or hurt, but a crystalline clarity about who these people really were and what they had cost me through years of subtle manipulation and emotional abuse. They had made one critical mistake in their perfectly orchestrated plan. They had shown their true selves so completely, so publicly, and so cruelly that there was no going back to the comfortable fiction that we were a loving family with normal problems. For the first time in my 28 years, I saw them clearly. And what I saw was about to change everything. My phone continued its relentless buzzing as the viral video spread across every major social media platform. Brandon's follower count had doubled in the past 20 minutes, and he was clearly thrilled by the engagement metrics his impromptu family drama documentary was generating. Jessica basked in her newfound internet fame, continuing to elaborate on her fictional narrative of my manipulative behavior for his increasingly large audience. But then my phone rang with a call that sent ice through my veins. The caller ID showed the name of Marcus Thompson, the marketing director for a prestigious tech startup that had been considering hiring me for a major rebranding campaign. This contract would have been the biggest opportunity of my career, potentially leading to 6 months of steady, well-paying work that could establish my reputation in the competitive Denver market. I stepped away from the circus of cameras and curious onlookers to answer the call, hoping I could somehow contain the damage to my professional reputation. But Marcus's opening words crushed that hope immediately. Carly, I'm calling about a video that several members of our team have shared in our company Slack channels. Given the nature of our brand and our commitment to family-friendly business practices, we've decided to go in a different direction for our marketing needs. Another client lost before I could even explain the situation. As Marcus spoke, I could hear the familiar sound of office chatter in the background, and I realized that my viral humiliation had become water cooler conversation at companies across Denver's business community. Marcus, please, if I could just explain what actually happened here. I'm sorry, Carly, but the decision has been made. We need to maintain our company's reputation, and this kind of public-family conflict raises questions about judgment and professionalism that we simply can't overlook. The call ended, and I realized that Jessica's performance wasn't just destroying my personal relationships. It was systematically dismantling the career I had spent 5 years building from nothing. My freelance marketing business depended entirely on word-of-mouth referrals and professional reputation, both of which were evaporating as thousands of strangers watched my sister paint me as an unstable family parasite. I looked at my social media notifications and saw that the damage was spreading faster than I could track. Business contacts were commenting on posts, clients were sending messages asking for explanations, and potential customers were withdrawing inquiries they had made just days earlier. My professional Instagram account, which had showcased carefully curated examples of successful marketing campaigns, was now flooded with comments from strangers debating my character. Some supporters had emerged people who questioned the cruelty of Jessica's public confrontation and wondered if there might be more to the story. But they were vastly outnumbered by viewers who had accepted Jessica's narrative and were now actively sharing the video as an example of how to cut off toxic family members. The most devastating comments came from people in my professional network. Former clients and business contacts were distancing themselves publicly, posting carefully worded statements about their commitment to family values and professional integrity that everyone understood as implicit criticism of my supposed behavior. Sarah Mitchell, a marketing consultant who had been both a competitor and occasional collaborator, posted a message that felt like a knife to my chest. Seeing situations like this reminds me why I'm grateful for my loving, stable family. Professional success means nothing without personal integrity and healthy relationships. The post had dozens of likes from people in our shared professional circle, effectively blacklisting me from Denver's tight-knit marketing community without anyone having to explicitly mention my name. As I scrolled through the growing pile of professional destruction, Jessica noticed my obvious distress and decided to use it as additional content for Brandon's livestream. She pointed in my direction and addressed the camera with mock concern. See how she's more worried about her phone and her business than about having an honest conversation with her family. This is exactly the kind of behavior I've been dealing with for years. Everything is always about money and image with Carly. Her words sparked a new wave of comments from viewers who interpreted my natural concern about losing my livelihood as evidence of her accusations about my selfish nature. The fact that I was experiencing genuine panic about my financial future was being used to justify the very actions that had caused that panic. But the situation was about to become even more nightmarish. Hotel security approached our group, led by a stern-looking manager in an expensive suit who clearly wanted to restore the elegant atmosphere of his luxury resort lobby. However, instead of asking the crowd to disperse or requesting that we move our drama to a private location, he walked directly toward me. "Miss Walker," he said in a voice loud enough for Brandon's camera to pick up clearly, "I've received complaints from other guests about your behavior disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of our resort. I'm going to have to ask you to collect your belongings and leave the premises immediately." The unfairness of the situation was breathtaking. Jessica had orchestrated this entire confrontation. Brandon had turned it into viral entertainment, and dozens of other guests had gathered around filming and commenting, but I was the one being asked to leave. My parents and Jessica watched with obvious satisfaction as the manager continued his pronouncement. Furthermore, the manager continued, apparently reading from a prepared statement. "We've been informed by the Walker family that you don't actually have a reservation here and that you've been causing distress to registered guests. Hotel policy requires that I ask you to leave or risk having local authorities contacted." I realized that my family had complained about me to hotel management, framing their calculated cruelty as justified response to my supposed bad behavior. They had positioned themselves as victims of my disruption, rather than as the orchestrators of the entire humiliating scene. Jessica stepped forward with her most sympathetic expression, placing a gentle hand on the manager's arm. "We're so sorry about this situation. We tried to handle it privately, but Carly has always had difficulty accepting boundaries. We really appreciate your patience." The manager nodded sympathetically toward Jessica while maintaining his stern expression toward me. Other guests murmured approvingly, clearly viewing Jessica and my parents as reasonable people dealing with a difficult family member, rather than as the architects of an elaborate psychological attack. Brandon continued filming everything, providing live commentary for his audience about the escalating drama and asking his viewers to share the stream with their followers. His viewership had climbed to over 50,000 people watching live as I faced the prospect of being kicked out of an expensive resort with nowhere to go and no transportation home. But as I stood there surrounded by the wreckage of my professional reputation and facing the immediate crisis of homelessness in an expensive mountain resort town, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number that would change the trajectory of this entire nightmare. Miss Walker, my name is Tyler Rodriguez. I'm an investigative journalist with the Denver Post, and I've been watching your family's live stream. I believe there's much more to this story than what's being presented. If you're willing to speak with me, I may have information that could be very important to your situation. I'm currently in the Belmont Resort Bar and would like to meet with you as soon as possible. As I read Tyler Rodriguez's message, hope flickered in my chest for the first time since this nightmare began. A journalist was interested in the truth behind what was happening. Maybe there was a way to counter Jessica's narrative before it completely destroyed my life. But before I could respond to Tyler's message, the situation in the lobby took another devastating turn. My parents approached the hotel manager with the kind of confident authority that came from years of successful business dealings. My father, Robert, handed the manager what appeared to be official documents while speaking in the measured tones he used for important real estate transactions. We want to formally distance ourselves from any responsibility for Miss Walker's behavior, he announced loud enough for Brandon's camera and the gathered crowd to hear clearly. These documents establish that we are no longer serving as her emergency contacts, medical decision makers, or financial guarantors for any purpose. My mother, Linda, nodded gravely as she added her own devastating blow. We've also removed her from all family accounts, insurance policies, and inheritance considerations. Carly is no longer legally or financially connected to our family in any way. The words hit me like physical violence. They hadn't just brought me here to humiliate me. They had used this trip as an opportunity to sever every legal and financial tie that connected us. Jessica produced a folder of paperwork that she had apparently been carrying in her designer purse documents that must have been prepared by lawyers weeks ago as part of their coordinated plan. We consulted with family law attorneys to make sure everything was handled properly, Jessica explained to Brandon's cameras with the calm professionalism she used in real estate presentations. Sometimes you have to protect yourself legally when dealing with unstable family members who might try to claim inheritance rights or financial support they're not entitled to. The hotel manager examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone familiar with legal paperwork, nodding as he confirmed their authenticity. Other guests murmured among themselves, and I heard someone say, "Wow, they really had to go through legal proceedings to protect themselves from her." Brandon's live audience was exploding with comments and reactions. The viewer count had climbed to over 70,000 people watching my complete familial abandonment unfold in real time. Comments ranged from support for my family's tough love approach to questions about whether their methods were too harsh, but the overwhelming narrative remained focused on me as the problem that required such extreme solutions. What made the situation even more surreal was how calm and collected my family appeared throughout this process. This wasn't an emotional decision or a moment of anger. It was the execution of a carefully planned legal strategy designed to protect their assets and reputation while completely isolating me from any family support systems. As the hotel manager reviewed the final documents, 2 police officers entered the elegant lobby, their presence immediately commanding attention from the gathered crowd. They approached our group with the professional demeanor of officers responding to a complaint, and I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was about to happen. "We received a report about harassment and potential trespassing," the older officer said, looking directly at me while consulting his notepad. "Are you Carly Walker?" Before I could answer, Jessica stepped forward with tears beginning to form in her perfectly applied makeup. "Officers, thank you so much for coming. We've been trying to handle this privately, but my sister has become increasingly aggressive and threatening toward our family." She described a completely fictional version of events in which I had forced my way into their family trip, demanded money and accommodations I wasn't entitled to, and then became verbally abusive when they tried to set reasonable boundaries. Her performance was so convincing, supported by our parents' solemn nodding and the hotel manager's complaints about my disruptive behavior, that I could see the officers accepting her narrative without question. We just want to enjoy our anniversary celebration without fear of further confrontations," my mother added, with the kind of quiet dignity that made her seem like a long-suffering victim, rather than an architect of psychological warfare. The younger police officer turned to me with a mixture of authority and sympathy. "Miss Walker, we understand that family situations can be emotionally difficult, but you don't have a reservation at this hotel and these folks have asked you to leave them alone. We need you to gather your belongings and find alternative accommodations." "But I don't have anywhere to go," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice and hating how weak it made me sound. "They brought me here under false pretenses, and now they're abandoning me in a resort town where I can't afford any of the hotels." The officers exchanged glances that suggested they had dealt with similar family disputes before. "That's not really a police matter, ma'am. This is a civil issue between family members. But what is a police matter is the complaint about harassment and the hotel's request that you leave the premises." Jessica seized the opportunity to add another layer to her performance. "Officers, we've been dealing with Carly's emotional instability for years. She often makes threats when she doesn't get what she wants, and we're honestly concerned about what she might do next." The casual way she painted me as potentially dangerous, combined with my obvious emotional distress and lack of anywhere to go, created exactly the image she wanted. To the police officers, the hotel staff, and Brandon's massive online audience, I appeared to be an unstable person who had forced my way into a family trip and was now making threats when asked to leave. "Miss Walker," the older officer said with professional firmness, "you have 30 minutes to collect your belongings and leave the hotel premises. If you attempt to contact or approach the Walker family after that time, you could face charges for harassment or stalking." As the police officers walked away and the hotel manager returned to his duties, I found myself completely alone in the marble lobby with my suitcase surrounded by strangers who had witnessed my total abandonment. Brandon was still filming, providing commentary about the dramatic conclusion to the family confrontation for his audience of nearly 80,000 viewers. The sun was beginning to set outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the beautiful mountain resort that had seemed so welcoming a few hours earlier now felt like a luxurious prison. I had no reservation, no transportation, and rapidly depleting funds to deal with the inflated prices of a high-end resort town. But most devastatingly, I had no family. Not just in the sense of being temporarily estranged from people who love me, but in the complete legal and emotional sense. They had systematically severed every connection that had tied us together, leaving me genuinely alone in the world for the first time in my adult life. As I sat on a lobby bench next to my suitcase, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened, my phone buzzed again with a message from Tyler Rodriguez. "Miss Walker, I just witnessed what happened with the police. Please meet me in the bar immediately. What I have to tell you about your family will shock you, and it might be the key to everything." Looking around the lobby one last time, at Jessica posing for more photos with Brandon, at my parents celebrating with champagne at the bar, visible through glass doors, at the other guests returning to their expensive vacations, now that the entertainment was over, I realized I had nothing left to lose. It was time to find out what an investigative journalist thought he knew about my family that could possibly be more devastating than what I had already experienced. The Belmont Resort's bar was an intimate space with leather seating and warm lighting that felt like a refuge from the chaos of the lobby. I found Tyler Rodriguez easily. He was the only person sitting alone, a laptop open on the table beside a notebook filled with handwritten notes. He looked to be in his early 30s with the kind of intense focus that suggested he took his work very seriously. "Miss Walker," he said, standing as I approached with my suitcase, "thank you for meeting with me. I know this has been an extraordinarily difficult day for you." Tyler's demeanor was completely different from the sensation-seeking Brandon who had turned my family crisis into viral entertainment. This man seemed genuinely concerned about the human cost of what he had witnessed, and his professional credentials as a Denver Post journalist gave me hope that someone might finally be interested in the truth rather than the spectacle. "I have to be honest with you," Tyler said as we settled into a corner booth away from other patrons. "I wasn't originally here to cover your story. I've been working on an investigation into viral family confrontation videos, trying to understand the psychological and social impact of these incidents. But what I witnessed today made me realize there might be a much bigger story here." He opened his laptop and showed me a database of similar videos he had been tracking. Families destroying each other on camera, usually with one member being publicly humiliated and abandoned. The pattern was disturbing: vulnerable family members being isolated and attacked, while their abusers positioned themselves as reasonable people setting healthy boundaries. "What caught my attention about your situation," Tyler continued, "was how organized and premeditated your family's attack appeared to be. Most of these viral family confrontations happen because of genuine emotional outbursts, but yours felt like a carefully orchestrated performance designed to achieve specific outcomes." I nodded, thinking about the weeks of planning revealed in Jessica's group chat messages and the legal documents they had prepared in advance. It definitely wasn't spontaneous. They've been planning this for at least a month. Tyler made notes as I described the group chat messages and the coordinated nature of their attack. But then his expression grew more serious, and he leaned forward with the intensity of someone about to reveal crucial information. "Carly, I need to ask you some questions about your parents' business. Your father, Robert, owns a Walker Development Group, correct? And your sister, Jessica, works there as a project manager." I confirmed what he already seemed to know, wondering where his questions were leading. Walker Development Group was a moderately successful real estate firm that specialized in residential developments and commercial properties around the Denver metro area. I had always assumed their comfortable lifestyle came from legitimate business success. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking," Tyler said, opening another file on his laptop. "Over the past 6 months, I've been investigating a series of financial crimes targeting elderly investors in the Denver area. Victims have been approached by seemingly legitimate investment companies offering guaranteed returns on real estate developments and retirement planning services." He showed me official documents from the Securities and Exchange Commission, FBI Financial Crimes Unit reports, and testimonies from elderly victims who had lost their life savings to sophisticated investment scams. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of victims, millions of dollars in losses, and a network of seemingly legitimate businesses that were actually fronts for elaborate Ponzi schemes. Walker Development Group isn't just connected to these crimes. Tyler said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was revealing. "According to federal investigators, it's the central hub of the entire operation." I stared at the documents in disbelief. Financial records showed money flowing through Walker Development Group's accounts in patterns that made no sense for a legitimate real estate business. Elderly investors had been told their money was funding new housing developments, but the projects either didn't exist or were vastly overvalued to hide the theft. "Your parents have been systematically targeting senior citizens in retirement communities, church groups, and community centers," Tyler continued. "They present themselves as successful real estate developers offering exclusive investment opportunities. The victims think they're getting in on ground floor opportunities for residential developments, but their money is actually funding your family's luxury lifestyle." The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. Victim impact statements described elderly couples losing their entire retirement savings, widows being left unable to afford basic necessities, and families watching their grandparents descend into poverty because of my parents' deliberate fraud. One statement particularly devastated me. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, age 74, invested her late husband's life insurance and payout of $42,000, based on assurances from Robert Walker that the investment was guaranteed safe. and would provide monthly income for the rest of her life. Mrs. Patterson is now facing eviction from her apartment and can no longer afford her prescription medications. Mrs. Patterson was my elderly neighbor, the sweet woman who had always been kind to me and had even sent me a card when I started my marketing business. The realization that my parents had specifically targeted someone I cared about made their crimes feel deeply personal. "Tyler," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "are you saying my parents are criminals, that they've been stealing from elderly people?" "I'm saying the federal government has enough evidence to file charges, but they've been trying to build an airtight case that includes all the co-conspirators and victims. What they need is someone with inside knowledge of the family's operations who can provide details about how the scheme works." He explained that federal investigators had been watching Walker Development Group for months, building cases for securities, fraud, elder abuse, mail fraud, and conspiracy charges that could result in decades in federal prison. But the complex nature of the financial crimes meant they needed insider testimony to ensure convictions. "Your family's attack on you today might have been about more than just cruelty," Tyler suggested. "If they suspected that federal investigations were closing in, they might have decided to isolate you preemptively, ensuring you couldn't testify against them or claim ignorance about the crimes." The possibility that their elaborate humiliation scheme was actually a calculated legal strategy made their betrayal even more chilling. They hadn't just destroyed me for entertainment. They had destroyed me to protect themselves from criminal prosecution. As I processed this information, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately: Mrs. Patterson. My heart broke as I answered, knowing what I was about to hear, but hoping against hope that Tyler's investigation was somehow mistaken. "Carly, dear," Mrs. Patterson's voice was trembling with tears. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to call. I think I've made a terrible mistake with my money, and I'm scared." Through her sobs, she described exactly the scenario Tyler had outlined. My parents had approached her at a community center presentation about safe retirement investments, convincing her to invest her late husband's life insurance money in what they claimed was a guaranteed real estate opportunity. She had trusted them because they were my family and because they had presented such professional materials and references. The monthly payments they promised stopped coming 6 weeks ago," she said, her voice breaking. "When I called their office, they said there were temporary delays with the development project, but I'm starting to think something is very wrong. Carly, I can't lose this money. It's all I have left." As I listened to Mrs. Patterson describe her growing fear and desperation, I realized the true scope of my parents' evil. They hadn't just targeted random strangers. They had specifically sought out vulnerable elderly people, many of whom trusted them because of their connection to me. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, fighting back tears, "I need you to know that I had no idea about any of this, but I'm going to help you get your money back. I promise you that." After I hung up, Tyler looked at me with the expression of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "Carly, I know this is overwhelming, but you have the power to stop them from hurting anyone else. Federal prosecutors are prepared to offer you full immunity in exchange for your cooperation in building cases against your parents and sister." But as I sat there processing the magnitude of my family's crimes and the devastation they had caused to innocent people like Mrs. Patterson, my phone buzzed with a message that would make this situation infinitely more complex. Jessica had sent a group text to several family members copying me. "Just wanted everyone to know that Carly has been threatening our family since we asked her to leave the resort. We have reason to believe she might be planning to make false accusations against Dad's business in retaliation for our decision to cut contact. We wanted to warn everyone that anything she says about our family should be considered the desperate lies of someone who's been cut off financially." My sister was already 3 steps ahead, preemptively discrediting any testimony I might give against their criminal enterprise by framing it as revenge for being disowned. But she had no idea that her message had just provided Tyler and federal investigators with evidence of consciousness of guilt and attempted witness intimidation. The war my family had started was about to escalate far beyond their expectations. Tyler's investigation had revealed a criminal enterprise that was both vast and deeply personal, but the true horror became clear as he showed me the complete victim list. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just a neighbor who had been targeted. She was part of a systematic campaign that had specifically focused on people connected to my life. "Oh, look at these names," Tyler said, scrolling through a database of victims. "Do any of them seem familiar to you?" As I read through the list, my blood ran cold. My high school English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had always encouraged my writing. The manager from my first part-time job at a local bookstore, Mr. Chen, who had given me a chance when I was 18 and inexperienced. The elderly couple who lived across the street from my apartment building, the Johnsons, who had always waved and asked about my work when they saw me. "But, Tyler, these aren't random victims," I said, my voice shaking as the pattern became clear. "These are people from my life. People who were kind to me. People who helped me when I was younger." He nodded grimly. "That's what caught our attention initially. The targeting pattern was too specific to be coincidental. Federal investigators believe your parents deliberately sought out people connected to you as a way to implicate you in the scheme, if they ever got caught." The documents revealed the sophisticated nature of their planning. They had researched people from my past, learning about their financial situations and vulnerabilities through social engineering and public record searches. They had even used my name and accomplishments to build credibility with their victims. "Mrs. Rodriguez invested her teacher's pension supplement because your father told her you had spoken highly of their investment opportunities," Tyler explained. "Mr. Chen invested his small business retirement fund because your mother claimed you were already an investor and had recommended them to other young professionals." The realization that my reputation and relationships had been weaponized to steal from good people who had helped shape my life was devastating beyond words. These weren't faceless victims. They were people who had shown me kindness when I needed it most, and my parents had specifically targeted that kindness as a weakness to exploit. Tyler showed me recorded phone calls that federal investigators had obtained through wiretaps. In one particularly chilling conversation, I heard my father's voice explaining their targeting strategy to an unknown associate. The beauty of using Carly's connections is that if this ever goes south, we can claim she was the one who identified the marks. She's adopted anyway, so cutting her loose legally was always part of the long-term plan. My mother's voice was equally cold in another recording. "The girl has always been useful for building trust with certain demographics. People see her as harmless and trustworthy, so they don't suspect anything when we approach her former teachers or neighbors." Jessica's involvement was perhaps the most calculated of all. She had used her real estate license and professional credentials to legitimize the investment presentations while secretly documenting conversations with victims that could be used to frame me if necessary. "Your sister has been building a paper trail for over 2 years," Tyler explained. "Emails where she mentions you suggesting certain investment targets, meeting notes that imply you recommended specific victims, even forged documents with your signature authorizing contact with people from your past." The scope of their long-term planning was breathtaking. They hadn't just been running a financial scam. They had been systematically building a case to destroy me if they ever needed a scapegoat for their crimes. My phone rang again, this time with a call from Mr. Chen, my former bookstore manager. His voice was filled with the same fear and confusion I had heard from Mrs. Patterson, but there was an additional element of betrayal that cut deeply into my heart. "Was Carly," he said, his accent thick with emotion. "Your sister Jessica called me this afternoon. She said you have been telling lies about your family's business to the police, and that I should not believe anything you say if you contact me." My stomach dropped as I realized Jessica was already implementing her strategy to turn the victims against me before they learned the truth about the crimes. She was positioning me as the real villain in their story, someone who was now making false accusations against the family that had tried to help them with their investments. She said you have become unstable since they had to cut you off financially, and that you might try to blame them for investment problems that were really your fault. Mr. Chen continued, Carly, I trusted your family because I trusted you. If you recommended them and now something is wrong, I need to understand what happened to my retirement money. The pain in his voice was unbearable. This man had given me my first real job, had believed in me when I was young and unsure of myself, and now he was facing financial ruin because my parents had used his trust in me to steal his life savings. Mr. Chen, I said, fighting through tears, I never recommended my family's business to anyone. I didn't even know what they were really doing until today. But I'm going to help you get your money back, I promise. As I finished the call, Tyler showed me more evidence of Jessica's preemptive strike against my credibility. She had spent the afternoon calling victims and family friends, warning them that I was making false accusations against my family in revenge for being cut off from their financial support. She's incredibly smart, Tyler said with grudging professional respect. By framing your potential cooperation with investigators as revenge rather than justice, she's making it much harder for federal prosecutors to use victim testimony effectively. But Jessica's strategy contained a crucial flaw that she hadn't anticipated. By calling the victims to discredit me before they had been contacted by investigators, she was inadvertently providing evidence of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. Every phone call she's making is being recorded by federal surveillance, Tyler explained. She's building a stronger case against herself with every attempt to manipulate the evidence. As we discussed the legal implications, my phone buzzed with a text message that made the situation exponentially more dangerous. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made it clear that my family's criminal associates were now aware of Tyler's investigation. Miss Walker, we understand you've been talking to reporters about family business. That would be very unwise for everyone involved. Some conversations are better kept private for the safety of all concerned. Tyler's expression darkened as he read the message. Carly, this investigation just became much more serious. If they're making veiled threats, it means they view you as a genuine danger to their operation. He immediately contacted federal agents who had been working the case, and within minutes, my phone was buzzing with a call from Special Agent Sarah Williams of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Miss Walker, Agent Williams said, we've been monitoring communications related to this investigation. We need to meet immediately to discuss your safety and your potential cooperation with our ongoing criminal case. As Tyler and I prepared to leave the resort bar to meet with federal investigators, I realized that what had started as a cruel family betrayal had escalated into something far more dangerous. My parents and sister weren't just facing public humiliation or family estrangement. They were facing federal criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. And now they were willing to use intimidation and threats to protect themselves, which meant my decision to cooperate with investigators could put my safety at risk. But looking at Tyler's evidence of the elderly victims who had lost their life savings, thinking about Mrs. Patterson's tears and Mr. Chen's confusion, I knew there was only one choice I could make. It was time to bring down the criminal enterprise that had been masquerading as my family. The FBI field office in Denver was nothing like what I had expected from television shows. Agent Sarah Williams led Tyler and me through sterile hallways to a conference room filled with whiteboards covered in financial charts, victim photographs, and evidence timelines that painted a comprehensive picture of my family's criminal enterprise. Miss Walker, Agent Williams began her tone professional but sympathetic. Before we discuss your potential cooperation, You need to understand the full scope of what your family has been doing and the legal jeopardy you're currently facing. She gestured to a board displaying victim impact summaries that made my stomach churn. Over 300 elderly victims had lost a combined total of $8.7 million to the investment schemes orchestrated through Walker Development Group. The human cost was staggering: families forced into bankruptcy, elderly people losing their homes, medical treatments being postponed because victims could no longer afford health care. What makes this case particularly complex, Agent Williams continued, is that your family has spent considerable time and effort creating evidence that implicates you as a primary architect of the targeting strategy. She showed me fabricated emails, forged documents, and recorded conversations where Jessica and my parents discussed investment strategies while deliberately mentioning my supposed involvement. The paper trail they had created made it appear that I had identified vulnerable targets, recommended specific victims, and even helped design the psychological manipulation techniques used to gain elderly victims' trust. In several recorded conversations, your sister explicitly states that you provided lists of former teachers, neighbors, and family friends who might be interested in investment opportunities, Agent Williams explained. She's created documentation suggesting you received commission payments for successful victim recruitment. I stared at the evidence in horror, realizing how thoroughly they had planned to destroy me if their crimes were ever discovered. They hadn't just been running a Ponzi scheme. They had been systematically building a case to frame me as the mastermind while positioning themselves as victims of my manipulation. The most damaging evidence, Agent Williams continued, is a series of bank transfers that appear to show you receiving payments from Walker Development Group's victim funds. Your parents have been making monthly deposits into your checking account for the past 18 months, always in amounts just under federal reporting requirements. Tyler leaned forward with obvious concern. What kind of deposits are we talking about? Between $800 and $9,000 monthly, Agent Williams replied, always with memo lines indicating consulting fees or marketing services. To federal investigators reviewing financial records, it would appear that Miss Walker was being paid substantial sums for services related to victim identification and recruitment. The room felt like it was spinning as I realized the true scope of their betrayal. Those monthly deposits had appeared in my account with notes about marketing, consulting work for family business projects. I had assumed my father was finally acknowledging my professional skills and giving me small contracts through his company. Instead, he had been creating evidence that I was profiting from the theft of elderly people's life savings. Agent Williams, I said, my voice shaking. I never received any consulting payments from my father's company. Those deposits. I stopped as the horrible truth dawned on me. I used that money for my rent and groceries. I thought it was legitimate payment for marketing work I was doing for them. Can you prove that you were actually providing marketing services worth those amounts? She asked. I tried to remember specific projects or deliverables I had created for Walker Development Group, but realized with growing panic that there had never been any actual work assigned. My father would call occasionally, asking for my opinion on real estate marketing trends or requesting that I review their company website, but nothing that would justify thousands of dollars in monthly payments. They were paying me for work that didn't exist, I realized aloud. They were putting stolen money in my account to make it look like I was part of the scheme. Agent Williams nodded grimly. That's our assessment as well, but from a prosecutorial standpoint, proving your innocence would require extensive investigation into every financial transaction and communication. Meanwhile, your family has created substantial evidence suggesting you were a willing participant in targeting vulnerable elderly victims. Tyler pulled out his laptop and showed Agent Williams the recordings he had made of Jessica's livestream performance at the resort. What about this evidence of them deliberately planning to destroy her reputation? Doesn't this support the theory that she was being set up as a scapegoat? It helps, Agent Williams acknowledged, but it also shows family conflict that could be interpreted as criminal associates turning on each other when facing potential prosecution. Jessica's statements about cutting off a toxic family member could be seen as legitimate business partners distancing themselves from a co-conspirator who had become a liability. The legal maze was becoming clearer and more terrifying. My family had spent years building evidence that would implicate me in their crimes while creating plausible explanations for their own behavior. If federal prosecutors decided to pursue charges against me, I would face decades in prison for crimes I had unknowingly helped facilitate through my mere existence and relationships. However, Agent Williams continued, we have reason to believe your family's recent actions may have provided us with the evidence we need to prove your innocence and their consciousness of guilt. She played a series of recorded phone calls that federal surveillance had captured throughout the afternoon following the resort confrontation. In call after call, Jessica contacted elderly victims with increasingly desperate attempts to discredit any future testimony I might provide. Mrs. Patterson, I know you trusted Carly, but she's become very unstable since we had to cut her off from family financial support, Jessica's voice said on one recording. If she contacts you claiming there are problems with your investment, please remember that she's angry about being excluded from family business decisions. In another call to Mr. I. Chen, Jessica's manipulation was even more explicit. Carly has been making false accusations against our family because she's desperate for money. She might try to convince you that your investment problems are somehow our fault. But the real issue is that she was skimming money from client accounts, and we had to fire her from all family business activities. These calls provided clear evidence of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation, but they also revealed something even more important for my defense. In several conversations, Jessica made statements that contradicted the paper trail they had created to implicate me. She accidentally admitted that you were never actually involved in client recruitment or business operations, Agent Williams explained. In trying to discredit your future testimony, she's actually providing evidence that the documents implicating you were fabricated. But as we discussed the legal implications and potential prosecution strategies, Agent Williams received a phone call that changed the entire trajectory of our conversation. After several minutes of intense discussion with someone on the other end, she hung up with an expression that suggested major developments. Miss Walker, she said, what I'm about to tell you will be shocking, but it may also provide the key to proving your innocence and understanding why your family targeted you so specifically. She opened a new file that contained documents I had never seen before, birth certificates, adoption records, and legal papers that appeared to be related to my origins and family history. We've discovered that your adoption was not legally legitimate, Agent Williams said carefully. The documents your parents used to adopt you when you were 3 years old were forged, and there are significant questions about how they obtained custody of you in the first place. Tyler looked up from his notes with obvious surprise. What does that mean exactly? It means that Carly's biological family has been paying substantial support to her adoptive family for 25 years, believing that money was going toward her education and care. Walker Development Group has been receiving and concealing these payments, using them to fund their lifestyle while treating Miss Walker as an unwanted burden. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only had my family been stealing from elderly victims, but they had been stealing from my biological family for decades while making me feel grateful for their reluctant care. Agent Williams, I whispered, are you saying my real family has been looking for me? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, then looked up with an expression that suggested our conversation was about to become even more complicated. Miss Walker, your biological parents have just landed at Denver International Airport. The revelation about my biological family sent shockwaves through everything I thought I knew about my life. but Agent Williams was just beginning to unveil the full scope of the deception that had shaped my existence. She opened another file containing financial records that showed decades of payments flowing from accounts I had never heard of into Walker Development Group's business operations. Your biological parents, David and Sarah Chen Morrison, are successful architectural partners based in Seattle, Agent Williams explained. They've been sending monthly support payments of $3,000 for your care and education since your adoption, plus additional payments for special circumstances like college tuition, medical expenses, and what they believed were graduate school costs. The numbers were staggering. Over 25 years, my biological family had paid nearly $1 million to my adoptive family, believing this money was supporting my growth, education, and opportunities. Instead, Robert and Linda Walker had been using these payments to fund their comfortable lifestyle while treating me like a financial and emotional burden they could barely tolerate. The Chen Morrisons have also been trying to contact you directly for the past 8 years, Tyler said, reading from documents Agent Williams had provided. They sent letters, emails, and even hired private investigators to locate you, but your adoptive family intercepted all communication and told them you had expressed no interest in contact. I thought about all the times I had wondered about my biological family, all the moments of loneliness when I had imagined having parents who truly wanted me. Meanwhile, my real parents had been actively seeking a relationship, sending love and financial support that was being stolen, while I was told repeatedly how grateful I should be for the Walker family's reluctant charity. The adoption fraud is actually what led us to the broader financial crimes, Agent Williams continued. The Chen Morrisons hired a law firm to investigate why their support payments weren't reaching you and why their attempts at communication were being blocked. Their attorneys discovered irregularities in your adoption paperwork that prompted them to contact federal authorities. She showed me documents that revealed the horrifying truth about my adoption. The legal papers that had given Robert and Linda custody of me when I was 3 years old had been fabricated by someone with access to legitimate government forms and official stamps. My biological parents had never consented to an adoption. I had been removed from their care through a complex scheme involving forged Child Protective Services reports and fraudulent court proceedings. You weren't legally adopted, Agent Williams said quietly. You were essentially kidnapped through document fraud, and your biological family has been fighting to find you ever since. Tyler was taking notes rapidly, his investigative instincts clearly recognizing the massive story unfolding before us. Who orchestrated the original kidnapping? How did the Walkers become involved? That's still under investigation, Agent Williams replied, but preliminary evidence suggests Robert Walker was working as a paralegal for a law firm that specialized in adoption services. He appears to have identified vulnerable children and wealthy biological families who could be exploited through fraudulent adoption proceedings. The conference room door opened, and Agent Williams stood as 2 people entered who would change my life forever. David and Sarah Chen Morrison were both in their early 50s, well-dressed professionals with the kind of confident bearing that came from successful careers and financial security. But what struck me most was how they looked at me, with an intensity of love and recognition that I had never experienced from the people who raised me. "Brilliant," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she approached tentatively. "We've been searching for you for so long." David hung back slightly, clearly emotional but trying to respect my need to process this overwhelming situation. "We know this must be incredibly confusing and frightening for you. We don't want to add pressure to what you're already dealing with." Agent Williams gestured for everyone to sit around the conference table. Mr. and Mrs. Chen Morrison flew down immediately when they learned about the federal investigation and Miss Walker's situation at the resort today. They've brought their attorney and additional evidence that may be crucial to both the criminal case and to understanding Miss Walker's true identity. Sarah opened a briefcase and removed photo albums documents and what appeared to be years of correspondence documenting their search efforts. The photos showed a happy young family, David and Sarah with a toddler who looked unmistakably like me birthday parties. I didn't remember holiday celebrations that had been stolen from my memory. When you disappeared, David explained, his voice heavy with years of grief. We were told by Child Protective Services that you had been placed in protective custody due to reports of abuse in our home. We were devastated but believed the system was protecting you from danger. Sarah continued the story with obvious pain. We hired attorneys immediately and demanded investigations into the abuse allegations. It took 6 months to prove that all the reports were fabricated, but by then, we were told you had been placed with a family that wanted privacy and that contact would be harmful to your adjustment. They had spent the next 25 years fighting legal battles, hiring private investigators, and working with victim advocacy groups to locate me and expose the corruption that had separated our family. The monthly support payments they sent were their way of ensuring I received care and education, even if they couldn't be part of my life directly. We never stopped loving you, Sarah said, reaching across the table to touch my hand gently. Not a day has gone by that we haven't thought about you and wondered if you were safe and happy. The contrast between their obvious love and the calculated cruelty of the Walker family was overwhelming. While Robert and Linda had spent years making me feel like a burden, they reluctantly tolerated my real parents had been fighting tirelessly to find me and ensure my well-being. Agent Williams placed another set of documents on the table. The Chen Morrison's investigation led to the discovery of at least 12 other fraudulent adoptions orchestrated through the same network. Robert Walker appears to have been part of a larger operation that targeted both vulnerable children and wealthy families who could be exploited for long-term financial gain. Tyler looked up from his notes with a question that cut to the heart of the legal implications. How does this affect the criminal charges related to the elderly victim scheme? It provides crucial context for understanding the targeting pattern and Miss Walker's unwitting role in the crimes, Agent Williams replied. Your adoptive family didn't just steal from elderly victims randomly. They specifically targeted people connected to you as a way to implicate you in their crimes, while also using your relationships to build trust with their marks. David leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent decades seeking justice. Agent Williams, what can we do to help ensure that the people responsible for separating our family and stealing from all these victims face appropriate consequences? Before she could answer, Agent Williams received another urgent phone call. After several minutes of intense conversation, she hung up with an expression that suggested major developments were unfolding rapidly. The situation just escalated significantly, she announced. Federal agents are currently executing arrest warrants and search warrants at Walker Development Group offices and the family's personal residences. Your adoptive family is being taken into custody as we speak. Through the conference room windows, I could see the Denver skyline glittering in the evening light. Somewhere in that city, the people who had raised me with calculated emotional cruelty and systematic financial theft were experiencing their own devastating reversal of fortune. But sitting at that table with Tyler Agent Williams and the parents who had never stopped loving me, I realized that justice was about more than punishment for past crimes. It was about protecting future victims and rebuilding the authentic relationships that had been stolen from me through decades of deception. The war my family had started with their cruel resort confrontation was ending, but my real life was just beginning. The news of the arrests reached us within hours, but the full scope of the federal operation was revealed through Tyler's media contacts and Agent Williams's updates throughout the evening. As we sat in the FBI conference room surrounded by evidence of decades of fraud and family destruction, the people who had orchestrated my public humiliation were experiencing their own devastating collapse. David and Sarah had insisted on staying with me through the entire process, their protective instincts activated after 25 years of separation. Their attorney, Margaret Foster, was a specialist in adoption fraud cases who brought additional legal expertise to our growing team of allies. What struck me most was how different it felt to be surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, rather than calculating how to exploit my vulnerabilities. The raids were coordinated across multiple locations. Agent Williams reported as she received updates from field teams. Walker Development Group offices the family's personal residences, Jessica's apartment, and 3 storage units containing documents related to the fraudulent adoption network. Tyler had been in constant communication with his editors at the Denver Post, coordinating coverage of what was becoming a major story about financial crimes and adoption fraud. His investigative work had evolved from documenting viral family drama to exposing a criminal enterprise that had destroyed hundreds of lives across multiple decades. The public reaction to the arrests has been extraordinary, Tyler said, showing us social media reactions on his laptop. The viral video of your humiliation has been recontextualized now that people understand what was really happening. Instead of seeing a family cutting off a toxic member, viewers are recognizing it as criminals trying to eliminate a potential witness. The comments section of Brandon's original livestream had transformed completely, where 12 hours earlier, people had been praising Jessica's strength in setting boundaries with a difficult family member. They were now expressing outrage at the calculated cruelty of targeting an innocent victim. The narrative had shifted from toxic family member gets consequences to innocent woman discovers her entire life was built on lies and crime. Margaret Foster opened her briefcase and produced documents that would secure my immediate future while the criminal cases proceeded through the courts. We've prepared emergency motions to freeze all assets obtained through criminal activity and to establish your legal rights as the victim of adoption fraud and financial crimes. She explained that as both a victim of the original adoption fraud and an unwitting participant in the financial crimes through the fabricated evidence trail, I would be entitled to substantial compensation from recovered assets. More importantly, my biological family's legal team was prepared to challenge every aspect of my fraudulent adoption and establish my true identity and family relationships. Sarah and I have discussed this extensively. David said, his voice filled with the emotion of a father who had waited decades to protect his daughter. We want to be part of your life in whatever way feels comfortable for you, but our immediate priority is ensuring you have the support and resources you need to rebuild from this trauma. Their approach was everything the Walker family had never been: patient, respectful, and focused on my needs rather than their own agenda. They had brought financial resources, legal expertise, and genuine love to a situation where I had been completely isolated and vulnerable just hours earlier. Agent Williams received another call that brought news about the broader criminal network. Federal agents have arrested 6 additional suspects connected to the fraudulent adoption ring, she reported. The investigation has expanded to include multiple states and dozens of additional victims who were separated from their biological families through similar schemes. The scope was staggering. What had started as my personal family crisis was revealing a systematic criminal enterprise that had destroyed countless families through decades of sophisticated fraud. The monthly payments my biological parents had been making were just one example of how victims had been exploited both emotionally and financially. Tyler's phone rang with a call from Brandon, the TikTok influencer, who had originally live-streamed my humiliation at the resort. But instead of the sensation-seeking content creator who had treated my pain as entertainment, Brandon sounded genuinely remorseful and eager to use his platform to support the truth. Tyler, man, I had no idea what was really going on, Brandon said, his voice audible on speakerphone. I've been watching the news coverage and I feel sick about how I helped spread their lies. I want to do whatever I can to help set the record straight. He had already posted multiple videos acknowledging his mistake in accepting Jessica's narrative without question and encouraging his followers to support victims of financial fraud and adoption crime. His massive audience was now being directed toward legitimate victim advocacy organizations, rather than treating family trauma as entertainment. Brandon's reached out to several other influencers who shared the original video, Tyler explained. There's a coordinated effort developing to use social media platforms to educate people about financial fraud targeting elderly victims and to promote resources for adoption fraud survivors. The same viral mechanisms that had destroyed my reputation 12 hours earlier were now being harnessed to expose the crimes and support the victims. Comment sections that had been filled with mockery and judgment were transforming into discussions about financial predators and family trauma, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences with manipulative family members and financial scams. As evening turned to night, Agent Williams provided updates on the interrogations that were taking place in federal holding facilities across the city. Jessica has been requesting to speak with attorneys about a potential cooperation agreement, she reported. She appears to understand the magnitude of the charges she's facing and may be willing to provide information about the broader criminal network. Sarah looked up from family photographs she had been sharing with me. What kind of sentences are they likely to face if convicted? For the financial fraud charges alone, we're looking at potential sentences of 20 to 30 years for each defendant. Agent Williams replied, the adoption fraud charges could add additional decades. And if we can prove the broader conspiracy involving multiple states and victims, the sentences could be even longer. The people who had spent my entire life making me feel unwanted and grateful for scraps of attention were facing the prospect of dying in federal prison. But what struck me was that I felt no pleasure in their downfall, only sadness for all the victims they had created, and relief that they would never hurt anyone else. Margaret Foster reviewed the legal timeline with us as federal prosecutors prepared to file formal charges. The arraignments will happen within the next 48 hours, and we expect the government to request no bail given the flight risk and the scope of the financial crimes. David and Sarah had arranged for a hotel suite where I could stay while processing everything that had happened and beginning to rebuild my life. Their approach was careful and respectful, offering support without overwhelming me, providing resources without creating new obligations. Carly, Sarah said as we prepared to leave the federal building, I know this has been the most overwhelming day imaginable, but I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. We're here for whatever you need for as long as you need it. Looking at these people who had fought for 25 years to find me, who had traveled across the country immediately upon learning of my crisis, who were offering unconditional love and support, after a lifetime of conditional tolerance, I felt something I had never experienced before, the security of being genuinely wanted and valued. Tyler gathered his notes and recordings as he prepared to write the story that would expose the full scope of the crimes and vindicate my character publicly. Carly, this investigation is going to help a lot of people understand how financial predators operate and hopefully prevent future victims from being targeted. As we walked out of the FBI building into the cool Denver evening, I realized that what had started as the worst day of my life was becoming the first day of my real life. The people who had raised me were facing justice for their crimes. The elderly victims would recover their stolen money, and I had found the family that had been searching for me since I was 3 years old. The war that Jessica had started with her calculated cruelty was ending with her arrest and imprisonment. But more importantly, the lies that had shaped my entire existence were being replaced with truth, love, and genuine relationships built on respect rather than manipulation. The arrest of the Walker family created a media sensation that transformed the narrative around my viral humiliation from entertainment into a serious examination of criminal justice and family trauma. Tyler's comprehensive investigative reporting for the Denver Post had been picked up by national news networks, turning a regional story about financial fraud into a nationwide discussion about elder abuse and adoption corruption. I watched from the hotel suite that David and Sarah had arranged as news cameras captured Jessica Robert and Linda being led from various locations in handcuffs in federal custody. The images were striking in their contrast to the confident, well-dressed family that had orchestrated my public destruction just 24 hours earlier. Jessica's arrest outside her luxury apartment complex was particularly dramatic. She had been in the middle of a live stream session with Brandon's followers, attempting to further discredit my character and paint herself as a victim of family dysfunction when federal agents knocked on her door with arrest warrants. The live stream captured her complete breakdown as she realized the magnitude of her legal jeopardy. "This is all Carly's fault," she screamed at the agents as they read her Miranda rights. "She's lying about everything because we cut her off from family money. She's making false accusations because she's desperate and unstable." But her protests fell on deaf ears as federal agents presented evidence of the financial crimes and her role in targeting elderly victims. The same confident manipulation tactics she had used against me were powerless against law enforcement officers who had spent months building comprehensive cases against her. Tyler had positioned himself strategically to document the arrest for his ongoing investigative series. His coverage went far beyond typical crime reporting, providing context about how financial predators operate and the psychological tactics used to maintain control over both victims and potential witnesses. The Walker family's attack on Carly wasn't just personal cruelty, Tyler explained in his latest article. It was a calculated attempt to destroy the credibility of someone who could potentially expose their criminal enterprise. By publicly humiliating her and creating a narrative of family dysfunction, they hoped to discredit any future testimony she might provide against their crimes. The hotel manager from the Belmont Resort had called personally to apologize for the way I had been treated during the confrontation. He had been following the news coverage and realized that his staff had been manipulated into participating in what was essentially witness intimidation by known criminals. "Miss Walker," he said during our phone conversation, "I want to offer you and your family the presidential suite for a week as our guests, with our sincere apologies for the way you were treated during what we now understand was a criminal attack designed to isolate and intimidate you." His offer was genuine and well-meaning, but Sarah and David had already arranged more comprehensive support for my immediate needs. They had contacted trauma counselors who specialized in adoption fraud survivors, financial advisors who could help me understand my rights to recovered assets, and legal specialists who would ensure my interests were protected throughout the criminal proceedings. The federal asset seizure process was revealing the true scope of the Walker family's ill-gotten wealth. Their luxury cars, designer clothing, expensive jewelry, and real estate holdings were all being evaluated as potential proceeds of criminal activity. The life of comfort they had maintained while making me feel like a burden had been entirely funded by stolen money from elderly victims and payments from my biological family. Agent Williams provided regular updates on the investigation's progress as federal prosecutors built their cases for trial. "The evidence we've recovered from the raids is extensive," she reported during one of our meetings. "Financial records, victim communications, planning documents, and recorded conversations that show a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating over multiple decades." The elderly victims were beginning to learn about the arrests and the potential for recovering their stolen money through federal asset forfeiture programs. Mrs. Patterson called me with tears of relief rather than despair, grateful that her trust in me hadn't been misplaced and hopeful that her late husband's life insurance money might be recovered. "Oh, Carly dear," she said, "I knew there had to be more to the story when that girl called trying to turn me against you. You've always been such a sweet, honest person. I'm so glad the truth is coming out. Mr. Chen's reaction was equally supportive. The federal investigation had revealed that his retirement savings were being held in accounts that could be traced and recovered, meaning his financial security might be restored rather than lost forever. Your family's crimes were terrible, he told me during a phone call, but your courage in cooperating with investigators is helping all of us get our lives back. You should be proud of standing up to people who hurt so many innocent victims. The victim impact statements were revealing the full human cost of the Walker family's crimes, beyond just financial losses. Elderly people had been forced to choose between medication and food. Families had been destroyed by financial stress, and victims had experienced profound trauma from being deliberately targeted and manipulated by people they trusted. Tyler's investigative reporting was earning recognition from journalism organizations and victim advocacy groups for its comprehensive examination of financial fraud tactics and their impact on vulnerable populations. His work was being used by law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing and investigating similar crimes. The story has evolved far beyond your individual situation, Tyler explained as we reviewed the media coverage. It's become a case study in how financial predators operate and how the justice system can respond effectively to protect victims and prevent future crimes. Brandon had become an unexpected ally in the effort to educate people about financial fraud and family manipulation. His massive social media following was being directed toward legitimate educational resources, and he had partnered with victim advocacy organizations to promote awareness about elder abuse and adoption fraud. I learned a hard lesson about believing what people tell you without investigating the truth, Brandon said during a video he posted, addressing his role in spreading the Walker family's lies. Content creators have a responsibility to verify information before platforming people's stories, especially when those stories can hurt innocent victims. The federal prosecutors assigned to the case were confident about securing convictions based on the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges. They were also pursuing the adoption fraud charges that would ensure accountability for the decades of family separation and psychological trauma inflicted on multiple victims. Margaret Foster kept us updated on the civil litigation that would eventually allow recovery of damages for the adoption fraud and years of stolen support payments. The financial restitution will be substantial, she explained, but more importantly, we're working to ensure that similar adoption fraud schemes can't operate in the future. As I watched news coverage of the federal investigation expanding to include multiple states and additional victims, I felt a profound sense of justice being served not just for my personal situation, but for everyone who had been harmed by the criminal enterprise that had masqueraded as my family. The hotel suite overlooked downtown Denver, and from my window, I could see the federal building where the Walker family was being processed through the criminal justice system. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been standing in a resort lobby feeling completely alone and powerless while they orchestrated my public humiliation. Now they were facing decades in federal prison while I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being and working with federal investigators to ensure justice for all their victims. The reversal was complete and satisfying in ways I never could have imagined when my coffee mug crashed to the marble floor at the Belmont Resort. But beyond the satisfaction of seeing criminals face consequences, I was beginning to understand something more profound about family identity and the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually demonstrate love through their actions. The transformation of public perception happened with remarkable speed as Tyler's investigative reporting and federal law enforcement statements provided the full context for what had appeared to be a simple family confrontation. The viral video that had initially destroyed my reputation became powerful evidence of criminal consciousness of guilt and premeditated witness intimidation. Major news networks were covering the story as a case study in financial crime and family manipulation, with legal experts analyzing the sophisticated tactics the Walker family had used to maintain their criminal enterprise while deflecting suspicion onto their primary victim. The same social media platforms that had initially amplified Jessica's lies were now being used to educate people about recognizing and reporting similar crimes. I received a call from Patricia, my former client who had terminated our restaurant marketing contract within hours of the viral video's initial spread. Her voice was filled with genuine remorse as she explained her decision to call and personally apologize for her hasty judgment. "Carly, I owe you a huge apology," Patricia said. "I acted too quickly based on incomplete information, and I want to make this right. Not only do I want to restore our marketing contract, but I'd like to increase the scope and payment to reflect the quality of work you've always provided." Her restaurant chain was planning a major expansion, and she wanted my marketing expertise to be central to their growth strategy. More importantly, she was using her business network to recommend my services to other companies, helping to rebuild my professional reputation through direct referrals rather than just social media vindication. Similar calls came throughout the day from other former clients and potential customers who had initially distanced themselves from me based on the viral family drama. The marketing director from the tech startup that had canceled their contract called with an even larger opportunity, acknowledging that his company had made a mistake in judging my character based on manipulated social media content. "We've been following the news coverage of the federal investigation," Marcus explained. "Your integrity in cooperating with law enforcement despite personal risk demonstrates exactly the kind of character and judgment we want in our marketing partners. We'd like to discuss a 6-month contract that would be larger than anything we've previously offered." The professional vindication felt good, but what meant more was the recognition that my character had been accurately represented by my actions, rather than by the lies that had been spread about me. Companies weren't just offering me work out of pity or guilt. They were recognizing that someone who would sacrifice personal comfort to expose crimes and protect elderly victims was exactly the kind of person they wanted to work with. David and Sarah had been following my professional recovery with the kind of pride that parents show when their children succeed through hard work and integrity. Their support wasn't conditional on my career success or financial independence. They were simply happy to see me being recognized for my actual character and abilities. "We've been reading about your marketing work," Sarah said as we shared lunch in the hotel restaurant. "Your clients describe you as creative, reliable, and genuinely caring about their business success. We're proud of what you've built on your own, despite all the obstacles that were placed in your path." Their praise felt different from anything I had experienced with the Walker family. There were no hidden agendas, no conditions attached, no sense that I needed to prove my worth or justify their investment in me. They were simply proud parents, learning about their daughter's achievements and celebrating her strength in overcoming adversity. Tyler's follow-up articles were generating national attention from victim advocacy organizations, law enforcement agencies, and academic researchers who studied financial fraud and family manipulation. His investigation was being cited in congressional hearings about elder abuse protection and adoption oversight reform. "The response has been extraordinary," Tyler reported during one of our meetings. "Victim advocacy groups are using your story to train counselors in recognizing complex family manipulation dynamics, and law enforcement agencies are updating their protocols for investigating financial crimes that involve family members as both perpetrators and victims." The educational impact extended beyond just law enforcement and social services. Business schools were incorporating Tyler's case study into courses about ethical marketing and the importance of verifying information before making business decisions. The story was becoming a teaching tool for understanding how misinformation spreads and how quickly false narratives can destroy reputations. Brandon had become genuinely committed to using his social media platform for education, rather than just entertainment. He had partnered with federal law enforcement agencies to create content about recognizing and reporting financial fraud reaching audiences that traditional educational approaches might not engage effectively. I realize now that I have a responsibility to my followers beyond just creating viral content. Brandon explained during a video call with our group the fact that my platform was used to spread lies that hurt innocent people has made me completely rethink how I approach content creation and fact checking. His transformation was particularly meaningful because it demonstrated how the same social media mechanisms that had initially amplified the Walker family's lies could be redirected toward protecting potential victims and supporting survivors of family trauma and financial crime. The federal prosecutors were building comprehensive cases that would ensure lengthy prison sentences for all the Walker family members, while also sending strong deterrent messages to other potential criminals. Agent Williams provided regular updates on the investigation's expansion to include additional states and criminal networks. The Walker case has opened up multiple other investigations, she reported. Other victims of similar adoption fraud schemes have come forward, and we're identifying connections to organized crime networks that specialize in document fraud and identity theft. Mrs. Patterson had become something of a media spokesperson for elderly victims of financial fraud, appearing in news interviews and congressional hearings to describe how criminals target vulnerable seniors through trust and manipulation. Her courage in speaking publicly was helping other victims understand they weren't alone and encouraging them to report similar crimes. Carly's strength in standing up to her own family to protect people like me gives me the courage to tell my story, Mrs. Patterson said during a television interview. If she can sacrifice her family relationships to do what's right, then I can find the strength to speak up for other seniors who might be targeted by these criminals. The victims who were beginning to receive restitution through federal asset forfeiture programs were expressing gratitude not just for the financial recovery, but for the validation that they hadn't been foolish or careless in trusting people who had deliberately manipulated them. Mr. Chen sent me a card with a message that brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, even when it cost you everything you thought you had. Your integrity saved my retirement and helped many other families avoid the pain your criminals caused. You are a hero to all of us. The community foundation that Sarah and David had helped me establish was beginning to receive donations from victims who wanted to support other families affected by financial fraud and adoption crime. The foundation would provide legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support for victims while also funding education and prevention programs. What started as a personal tragedy is becoming a force for positive change that will protect many other families from experiencing similar trauma, David observed as we reviewed the foundation's initial plans. As I looked back on the viral video that had initially seemed to destroy my life, I could see how it had actually become the catalyst for exposing crimes that might have continued indefinitely without intervention. The Walker family's decision to humiliate me publicly had ultimately led to their own exposure and the protection of hundreds of potential future victims. The same technology and social media platforms that had initially spread lies about me were now being used to educate people about financial fraud, prevention, family manipulation tactics, and the importance of supporting victims rather than judging them based on incomplete information. Justice wasn't just being served through criminal prosecutions and financial restitution. It was being achieved through systematic changes in how people understood and responded to family trauma, financial crime, and their responsibility to protect vulnerable victims. The success of my marketing consultancy grew exponentially as news coverage of the federal investigation demonstrated my integrity under extreme pressure. Companies across the Denver metropolitan area were reaching out with opportunities that went far beyond simple contract work. They wanted to partner with someone whose character had been tested and proven in the most public and challenging circumstances possible. The tech startup that had initially canceled their contract offered me a position as their director of marketing with equity stakes and leadership responsibilities that would establish my career at a completely new level. But even more meaningful were the small business owners who contacted me specifically because they had witnessed how I had prioritized protecting elderly victims over my own financial security. We want to work with someone who does the right thing, even when it costs them personally, explained Jennifer Walsh, owner of a successful chain of pediatric dental practices. Your willingness to sacrifice your family relationships to protect vulnerable seniors tells us everything we need to know about your character and professional ethics. David and Sarah had been instrumental in helping me navigate these new opportunities while ensuring that I made decisions based on my own goals and values rather than feeling pressured to prove myself worthy of their support. Their guidance came from genuine parental love rather than the conditional approval I had experienced with the Walker family. Your success belongs to you, Sarah reminded me as we reviewed multiple job offers and business opportunities. We're proud of your accomplishments, not because they reflect on us, but because they demonstrate the strength and integrity you've always possessed. The architectural firm that David and Sarah owned in Seattle had offered me the opportunity to relocate and join their team, but they made it clear that their invitation was based on my professional qualifications rather than family obligation. They respected my independence and wanted me to choose the path that would bring me the most fulfillment and success. Tyler's investigative reporting had earned National Journalism Awards and led to a book deal that would provide comprehensive documentation of financial fraud tactics and their impact on victims. He had become a leading expert on family manipulation and elder abuse, consulting with law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy organizations across the country. Your case has become the gold standard for understanding how financial criminals use family relationships to maintain control and deflect suspicion, Tyler explained as we discussed his book project. Law enforcement agencies are using our investigation as a training model for recognizing and prosecuting similar crimes. The impact extended beyond just criminal justice applications. Business schools were incorporating the case study into their ethics curricula, teaching future executives about the importance of verifying information before making personnel decisions and the responsibility to support employees who face family trauma or manipulation. Brandon's transformation from sensation-seeking content creator to education advocate had resulted in partnerships with federal agencies and nonprofit organizations that were reaching millions of people with information about recognizing and reporting financial fraud. His massive social media following had become a force for victim protection rather than entertainment exploitation. Working with Carly and the federal investigators taught me that content creators have real power to either help or hurt people. Brandon reflected during an interview about his changed approach. I want to use my platform to protect potential victims rather than just chasing viral moments that might damage innocent people. The community foundation I had established with my biological parents' support was growing rapidly as victims of financial fraud and adoption crime contributed both funds and volunteer time to support other families facing similar challenges. We were providing legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support while also funding research and prevention programs. Mrs. Patterson had become a particularly effective advocate for elderly victims, speaking at community centers and retirement facilities about recognizing and avoiding financial predators. Her courage in sharing her story publicly was helping other seniors understand that being targeted by criminals wasn't shameful, but was actually evidence of the kindness and trust that made them valued community members. These criminals don't target mean or suspicious people, Mrs. Patterson explained during one of her presentations. They target good, generous people who believe in helping others and trusting their neighbors. Being victimized by a criminal doesn't mean you're foolish. It means you're exactly the kind of person who makes communities strong and caring. Mr. Chen had recovered his entire retirement savings through federal asset forfeiture and had donated a substantial portion to the foundation as a way of supporting other victims. His gratitude went beyond just financial recovery. He felt that standing up to the Walker family had validated his own judgment and shown that criminals could be held accountable for their actions. Carly gave me back more than just my retirement money, Mr. Chen said during a foundation fundraising event. She gave me back my faith that good people will stand up to protect others even when it costs them personally. That's worth more than any financial investment. The federal prosecutors had secured plea agreements from several co-conspirators in the adoption fraud network, providing evidence that would ensure lengthy prison sentences for the Walker family, while also exposing other criminal operations that had been targeting vulnerable children and families for decades. Agent Williams updated us on the expanding investigation as additional victims came forward and more criminal networks were identified. The Walker case has opened up investigations in 12 states and has led to the identification of over 50 additional victims of similar schemes. The impact of your cooperation extends far beyond just your individual situation. Jessica's attempts to negotiate a plea agreement were unsuccessful because federal prosecutors felt that the evidence was so overwhelming and the crime so serious that accepting a reduced sentence would send the wrong message about accountability for financial crimes targeting vulnerable victims. The Walker family's crimes were particularly cruel because they involved betraying trust relationships and targeting people who were already vulnerable due to age, family status, or emotional trauma, the lead prosecutor explained during a victim impact meeting. The sentences need to reflect the serious nature of these offenses and serve as a deterrent to other potential criminals. The trial proceedings were scheduled to begin within 6 months, but the evidence was so comprehensive and the plea negotiations so unsuccessful that legal experts predicted lengthy sentences for all defendants. More importantly, the asset forfeiture process had identified enough recoverable funds to provide substantial restitution to all identified victims. As I reflected on the transformation of my life over the past several months, I was struck by how completely my understanding of family success and justice had evolved. The people who had raised me while making me feel like a burden were facing life in federal prison, while the parents who had searched for me for 25 years were supporting my growth into independence and professional success. The marketing consultancy that I had built despite the Walker family's emotional manipulation had become a thriving business that allowed me to choose clients based on shared values rather than financial desperation. I was no longer grateful for scraps of approval or terrified of losing relationships with people who treated me badly. Most importantly, I had learned the difference between performing for conditional acceptance and building authentic relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. The foundation work was allowing me to protect other victims while also healing my own trauma through meaningful action that prevented similar crimes. Standing in the conference room where I had first learned the truth about my adoption and family crimes, looking out at the Denver skyline where I was building a new life based on authentic relationships and professional integrity, I felt something I had never experienced during my years with the Walker family: genuine peace and confidence about my worth as a person and my place in the world. 1 year later, I returned to the Belmont Resort, not as a victim of family betrayal, but as the keynote speaker for a national conference on elder abuse prevention and financial crime victim support. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same marble lobby where my coffee mug had shattered in devastation was now hosting an event dedicated to protecting other potential victims from similar crimes. The hotel staff recognized me immediately, but their treatment was completely transformed. Instead of the suspicious glances and dismissive service I had received during my humiliation, I was greeted with genuine respect and appreciation for the advocacy work that had grown from my experience. Miss Walker, the hotel manager said, as he personally welcomed me to the conference, it's an honor to host an event that brings together law enforcement victim advocates and survivors to prevent other families from experiencing the trauma that was inflicted on you here. The conference attendees included federal agents, social workers, attorneys specializing in elder law, and survivors of financial fraud from across the country. My biological parents had traveled from Seattle to attend my presentation not out of obligation, but because they were genuinely proud of how I had transformed personal trauma into systematic change that protected vulnerable people. Tyler was covering the conference for a national magazine article about victim advocacy and criminal justice reform. His book about the Walker family case had become required reading for law enforcement academies and social work programs, providing detailed analysis of how financial predators operate and how victims can be supported through recovery and justice processes. The ripple effects of your decision to cooperate with federal investigators continue to expand, Tyler noted as we reviewed the conference agenda. This event wouldn't exist without your courage in standing up to your adoptive family, and the people attending represent hundreds of thousands of potential victims who will be better protected because of your advocacy work. Brandon had also been invited to speak about responsible social media content creation and the impact of viral misinformation on vulnerable people. His transformation from sensation-seeking influencer to education advocate had become a case study in digital responsibility and the power of social media platforms to either help or harm real people. I learned that chasing viral content without considering the human cost isn't just irresponsible entertainment. It can actually enable criminals and silence victims, Brandon explained during his presentation. Content creators have a responsibility to verify information and consider how our platforms might be used to manipulate public opinion about complex situations. Mrs. Patterson was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Elder Abuse Prevention Coalition for her advocacy work following her recovery from the Walker family's financial fraud. At 75, she had become a nationally recognized speaker who helped other elderly victims understand that being targeted by criminals was evidence of their kindness and community value rather than personal weakness. When criminals targeted me, they thought they were stealing from a helpless old woman, Mrs. Patterson said during her award acceptance speech, but they actually awakened a fierce advocate who was determined to protect other seniors from experiencing similar trauma. Sometimes our greatest strengths are revealed through our worst experiences. The foundation that my biological parents and I had established had grown into a nationally recognized organization providing legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support for victims of family-based financial fraud. We were also funding research into prevention strategies and supporting legislative reforms that would make similar crimes more difficult to commit and easier to prosecute. Agent Williams had been promoted within the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, partially based on the success of the Walker family investigation and its impact on identifying broader criminal networks. She was leading a national task force focused on adoption fraud and family-based financial crimes that was helping other law enforcement agencies recognize and investigate similar cases. The Walker case demonstrated how family relationships can be weaponized to facilitate complex financial crimes while silencing potential witnesses, Agent Williams explained during her conference presentation. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for protecting victims and ensuring that criminals can't hide behind family dysfunction narratives when they're actually orchestrating sophisticated fraud schemes. Mr. Chen had not only recovered his entire retirement savings, but had become a volunteer financial counselor helping other elderly victims understand their rights and navigate the recovery process. His experience with the Walker family's targeting had motivated him to pursue additional education in financial planning, specifically to help protect other seniors from similar exploitation. Being victimized taught me that criminals rely on shame and isolation to maintain control over their targets, Mr. Chen said during a workshop he was leading. When victims understand that they were deliberately targeted by professional criminals rather than making foolish mistakes, they can begin healing and protecting others from similar abuse. The federal trials had resulted in lengthy prison sentences for all the Walker family members and their criminal associates. Jessica received 25 years for her role in the financial fraud and adoption conspiracy, while Robert and Linda each received 30-year sentences that would likely keep them imprisoned for the rest of their lives. More importantly, the asset forfeiture process had recovered over $12 million that was distributed among the hundreds of identified victims, providing substantial restitution that helped many elderly people recover their financial security and independence. The conference included workshops on recognizing financial fraud tactics, supporting family members who might be experiencing manipulation, and creating community networks that protect vulnerable people from isolation and exploitation. The educational materials developed from Tyler's investigation and my foundation's research were being distributed to senior centers, community organizations, and families across the country. During my keynote presentation, I looked out at an audience of people dedicated to protecting others from the kind of trauma I had experienced. The same technology that had initially amplified lies about my character was now being used to educate people about preventing financial crimes and supporting victims through recovery processes. The worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for exposing crimes that had destroyed hundreds of families. I told the conference attendees, "What I learned is that authentic healing doesn't come from revenge against people who hurt us, but from using our experiences to protect others and build communities based on genuine care rather than manipulation." The standing ovation I received wasn't just recognition for my survival, but appreciation for the systematic changes that had grown from my decision to prioritize truth and victim protection over family loyalty and personal comfort. As the conference concluded and I prepared to return to Denver, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by that moment when my coffee mug crashed to the marble floor in this same hotel lobby. The family that had raised me with calculated emotional cruelty was serving life sentences for their crimes, while the parents who had searched for me for 25 years were supporting my growth into advocacy and professional success. The marketing consultancy I had built was thriving based on authentic relationships with clients who valued integrity and social responsibility. The foundation work was allowing me to protect other families while continuing my own healing through meaningful action that prevented similar crimes. Most importantly, I had learned that family isn't defined by legal documents or shared genetics, but by the quality of care, respect, and genuine love that people demonstrate through their actions. The community of advocates, survivors, and supporters I had found through this experience had become my chosen family. People who celebrated my strengths, supported me through challenges, and shared my commitment to protecting vulnerable people from harm. Standing in the hotel lobby where my old life had ended in devastating betrayal, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had led me to discover my real family, my authentic purpose, and the unshakable confidence that comes from choosing truth and justice over comfort and convenience. 5 years have passed since that devastating day at the Belmont Resort, and I often think about how completely my understanding of family justice and personal worth has been transformed by the experience. The coffee mug that shattered on the marble floor became a metaphor for the breaking apart of illusions that were preventing me from living an authentic life built on genuine relationships and shared values. Today, I run a successful marketing consultancy that specializes in helping nonprofit organizations and ethical businesses reach their communities with messages of social responsibility and victim protection. My client relationships are built on mutual respect and shared commitment to making positive change rather than desperate gratitude for conditional acceptance. The professional reputation I lost in a single viral moment has been rebuilt stronger than ever, based on demonstrated integrity under pressure rather than careful image management. The foundation that my biological parents and I established has become a nationally recognized organization that has helped over 5,000 families affected by financial fraud, adoption, crime, and family-based manipulation. We provide legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support while also funding research and legislative advocacy that makes these crimes more difficult to commit and easier to prosecute. David and Sarah have become the loving, supportive parents I never knew existed during my years with the Walker family. Their care isn't conditional on my success or performance. They celebrate my achievements because they love me, and they support me through challenges because that's what real families do for each other. We've built traditions together, shared holidays, and created the kind of authentic family relationships that can't be manufactured or performed but must grow from genuine mutual affection and respect. Mrs. Patterson, now 80 years old, remains one of my closest friends and strongest supporters. She has become a nationally recognized advocate for elderly victims of financial crime, and her courage in speaking publicly about her experience has helped thousands of other seniors understand that being targeted by criminals is evidence of their kindness and community value rather than personal weakness. "You gave me back more than just my money," she often tells people during her advocacy presentations. "You gave me back my faith that good people will stand up to protect others even when it costs them everything they thought they had." Mr. Chen has used his recovered retirement savings to establish scholarships for young people who demonstrate integrity and commitment to community service. He says that supporting young people who share values of honesty and protecting others is the best way to honor the courage it took to expose the Walker family's crimes. Tyler's book about the investigation became a bestseller and led to documentary film projects that continue to educate people about recognizing and preventing financial fraud. He has become one of the country's leading experts on family-based financial crimes, consulting with law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy organizations around the world. Brandon's transformation from sensation-seeking content creator to responsible digital educator has inspired other social media influencers to consider the human impact of their platforms. He now creates content focused on financial literacy, fraud prevention, and supporting victims of family trauma, reaching millions of people with information that helps protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation. The Walker family members remain in federal prison, where they will likely spend the rest of their lives. Jessica has attempted multiple appeals and continues to maintain her innocence, but the evidence against her was overwhelming and the sentences were appropriate for the scope of crimes committed. I feel no satisfaction in their imprisonment, but I am grateful that they can never hurt other families the way they hurt so many innocent victims. The viral video that initially destroyed my reputation has become educational content used in digital literacy courses and social media responsibility training programs. It demonstrates how quickly false narratives can spread and how important it is for people to seek complete information before making judgments about complex family situations. Agent Williams continues to lead federal task forces focused on family-based financial crimes and has helped develop protocols that are being used by law enforcement agencies across the country. The Walker case became a model for recognizing and investigating complex fraud schemes that use family relationships to maintain control and deflect suspicion. What I've learned through this experience is that sometimes the worst betrayals become the greatest gifts by forcing us to confront truths we might otherwise avoid and leading us to authentic relationships we might never have discovered. The family that raised me with calculated cruelty was never capable of genuine love. but their betrayal led me to people who demonstrated real care through their actions rather than their words. I've also learned that justice isn't primarily about punishment for past wrongs, but about preventing future harm and building communities where vulnerable people are protected rather than exploited. The foundation work allows me to transform personal trauma into systematic change that makes other families safer from the kind of predators who targeted my neighbors and destroyed so many lives. Most importantly, I've discovered that family isn't determined by genetics or legal documents, but by the quality of love, respect, and genuine care that people demonstrate through their choices and actions. The community of advocates, survivors, and supporters I found through this experience has become my chosen family. People who celebrate my authentic self rather than demanding performance, who support me through challenges rather than exploiting my vulnerabilities. The morning my coffee mug crashed to the marble floor felt like the end of everything I thought I knew about my life and relationships. But it was actually the beginning of discovering who I really was and what kind of people deserve to be part of my authentic family story. Standing here today, surrounded by people who genuinely love and support me, leading work that protects other families from experiencing similar trauma, I feel something I never experienced during my years with the Walker family: complete peace about my worth as a person and confidence about my place in the world. Sometimes the greatest cruelties reveal the most important truths, and sometimes losing everything we thought we wanted leads us to discover everything we actually needed. Have you ever experienced a moment when what felt like the worst betrayal actually led you to discover your real strength and authentic family? I'd love to hear your stories about finding genuine relationships after experiencing family manipulation, or recognizing the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually demonstrate love through their actions. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help other people who might be experiencing similar family trauma know they're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity and building authentic relationships based on genuine care and respect. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how real healing happens through protecting others and choosing truth over comfort. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting the kind of community where vulnerable people are protected rather than exploited. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by the integrity you demonstrate when facing difficult choices about truth, justice, and genuine care for others.